The wind sharpened itself against the frozen ridge as Hale pressed his body lower into the snow, letting the crusted surface swallow his outline. Frost clung to his hood and beard like a second skin, but he welcomed the stillness it demanded. Movement meant heat, and heat meant visibility. Out here, any mistake announced itself in bright colors on an enemy scanner. He exhaled slowly, watching the vapor linger before dissolving into the cold, and adjusted the rifle balanced across the bipod. The weapon felt heavier in this bitter air, but its weight steadied him, grounding him in routine and purpose. He shifted his gaze through the scope, sweeping the slope below. The mountain forest was silent except for the soft mutter of powder falling from overloaded branches. Tracks in the snow told him everything he needed to know. 6 alien officers moving in tight formation, confident in their superior armor and insulated physiology. They believed the ridge belonged to them now. Hale let the corner of his mouth twitch, the closest he allowed himself to a smile. Confidence was the easiest weakness to exploit. He wasn't here solely to pull a trigger. Command had told him the relay station needed 48 more hours to come online. After that, the humans on this frozen rock would have a chance at long-range support. Until then, the ridge was Hale's responsibility. He had always accepted heavy responsibilities without complaint. A childhood spent on a frontier colony had taught him that no one else came to save you. You learned to stand, to fight, and to stay standing even when fear chewed on your bones. A faint vibration traveled through the snow. Hale tightened his grip on the rifle and slid one gloved hand beneath the stock, settling into position. The Vhar'kell officers emerged between the trees, tall silhouettes wrapped in white-blue armor that shimmered like crystallized ice. Their helmets, translucent domes reinforced with chitin, reflected the pale sun in sharp splinters of color. Hale had seen those helmets up close before. He remembered how cold they felt, how quickly they cracked when struck at the right angle. The aliens paused, exchanging low, resonant pulses of sound that Hale could not decipher but understood well enough. They were relaxed, dismissive. They had come to confirm the feral human interference reported by scouts, expecting to find nothing more than abandoned gear or a poorly hidden outpost. Hale had listened to their open-channel boasts for the last 30 minutes, their taunts painting humans as stubborn animals hurling rocks at a tidal wave. He didn't take offense. He liked an enemy that talked. Talking meant they weren't paying attention to the ridge above them. One officer raised a scanner, sweeping it across the ridge. Hale remained perfectly still, every muscle coiled in deliberate quiet. The device emitted a soft chirp, detecting nothing unusual. The officer stowed it and continued forward. Snow crushed beneath their heavy steps, each stride bringing them into Hale's carefully measured kill zone. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear, but anticipation sharpening itself into purpose. Through the scope, he focused on the lead officer. The alien's helmet glimmered with delicate fractures formed by the night's brutal cold. A single well-placed round would turn those flaws catastrophic. Hale shifted a hair to the left, aligning crosshairs with absolute precision. The moment stretched thin, filled only by his pulse and the faint whine of the rifle's charge chamber. He waited one breath more. The officer stepped into full view, unaware of the danger coiled above him. Hale exhaled, steady and final, and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through frozen air. Recoil thudded into Hale's shoulder as the shot ripped the stillness apart, and the lead Vhar'kell officer collapsed instantly, helmet bursting into a spray of glittering shards that scattered across the snow like spilled stars. The remaining officers froze, shock rippling through their formation before instinct wrenched them toward whatever cover the fractured terrain provided. Hale allowed himself no satisfaction. One clean strike meant nothing if he didn't control the pace that followed. He cycled the rifle with steady hands, feeling the familiar bite of frozen metal through his gloves. The ridge belonged to him only as long as he stayed a ghost. A single misjudged breath could reveal the heat he fought to suppress. Below him, the aliens shifted from confusion to practiced aggression, their resonant calls snapping into a coordinated pattern. Hale tracked the officer attempting to establish command, a tall figure whose armor refracted the winter light in prismatic streaks. The alien raised a plasma caster toward the ridge, firing wild pulses that scorched bark and sent explosions of steam billowing from the snowpack. The blast didn't reach him, but their intensity urged him to relocate before the officer's precision improved. Hale slid backward, keeping his body low, and eased along a narrow ledge carved by centuries of wind. Every movement had to be deliberate. Haste caused sound, and sound invited death. Through a gap in the snow-laden branches, Hale glimpsed two officers regrouping behind a fallen tree, their helmets already showing faint fractures from the brutal cold. He steadied his breathing, knowing the next shot had to do more than kill. It had to fracture their confidence. The officers hesitated, scanning the ridge with jittering instruments that flashed faint warnings across their armor. They expected reinforcements to arrive quickly, which meant Hale had minutes at best to dismantle their resolve. He aligned his scope on the officer closest to stabilizing the group's defenses. The alien leaned forward, issuing orders in sharp, vibrating pulses. Hale exhaled and fired. The round struck just below the helmet's crest, and the crystalline shell imploded with a brittle snap. Shouts rolled through the clearing as the remaining officers scrambled away from the spreading pool of iridescent fluid staining the snow. Their formation collapsed into disarray, and for the first time Hale sensed something unfamiliar from them. Fear, not of death, but of miscalculation, of discovering that the enemy they mocked possessed skill equal to their own. One officer pitched a sonic beacon into the open, its piercing oscillation searching for a human heat signature. Hale flattened himself behind a jut of ice as the vibration crept over him like probing fingers. The beacon failed to lock onto anything precise, and the officer's frustration echoed in a harsh, guttural pulse. Hale knew the next scan would be more thorough, and time narrowed around him. Hale shifted along the ridge, keeping his movements smooth as he sought a new angle that would deny the aliens any predictable pattern. The forest below seethed with their agitation, each officer broadcasting terse signals as they attempted to regain order. Hale recognized the rhythm of desperation. The Vhar'kell were trained to dominate battlefields, not question them. Their uncertainty was his strongest ally. He steadied the rifle, watching the officer who had taken command after the earlier casualties. This one moved cautiously, head tilting with deliberate calculation rather than arrogance. Hale respected that caution. It made the encounter more dangerous, but also more honest. He waited for the alien to expose a weakness, however slight, trusting patience to carve the path forward. The moment he needed was coming very soon. Hale steadied his breathing, letting the metallic taste of cold air anchor him in the moment. The surviving Vhar'kell officers were adapting, moving slower now, communicating in shorter bursts as they swept the slope with overlapping sensors. Their discipline had returned, but the fear underneath it trembled like a fault line ready to split. Hale had seen it before, in men and in monsters. Panic didn't always look like running. Sometimes it hid behind precision, behind the desperate need to control what could no longer be controlled. He adjusted the rifle, sighting along the path where he predicted they would regroup. Yet even as he measured angles and distances, his mind drifted, unbidden, to faces long gone, his mother's hands gripping a doorframe, his father's last look when the Vhar'kell ships descended on their settlement. He had been 13, old enough to remember the color of the sky burning, too young to change anything. He exhaled the memory like smoke. The past wasn't a weakness, he told himself. It was the reason he was still here. Every shot he took was a kind of answer, a message carved in noise and precision. The aliens believed they understood humanity through their data, through dissected prisoners and intercepted transmissions. They never accounted for endurance, for the quiet defiance that survived after the screaming stopped. Hale was here to remind them. A sudden vibration pulsed beneath the snow, stronger than before. He looked up sharply and saw the nearest officer thrust a device into the ground, a sonic triangulator. The air around him seemed to ripple as invisible waves rolled outward, shaking the ridge and rattling the ice-laden branches above. Hale pressed his palms into the snow, jaw tight as the resonance crawled through his bones. The sound made thinking difficult, as if each pulse erased a fraction of his focus. He forced himself to stay conscious of rhythm, counting between waves. When he had the timing, he angled the rifle downward and squeezed off a round. The bullet struck the triangulator dead center, detonating it in a burst of shattered crystal and compressed air. The blast sent two aliens sprawling, their armor flashing emergency flares of pale blue. He moved quickly, sliding down to a lower perch before they could recover. The new position offered a closer view of the officers regrouping beside a cluster of snow-drowned pines. They were closer now, their language sharper, their movements heavier. Hale could see frost cracking along their armor seams. The cold was turning against them, slowing the liquid conduits that powered their suits. He waited until the lead officer lifted its weapon and fired a blinding lance of plasma across the ridge. Snow vaporized in an instant, and heat washed over Hale's face. The strike missed by inches but cut off his escape path. He rolled behind a fallen trunk, pulling his secondary sidearm free, a compact rail-burst pistol untested in these temperatures. The weapon hummed faintly as he rose into a crouch. One of the officers had flanked further than expected, appearing almost within arm's reach. The alien's breath fogged the air inside its cracked helmet, each exhale a shimmer of light. Hale fired twice, and the burst tore through armor and bone alike. The alien fell soundlessly, its body steaming in the snow. The others reacted instantly, unleashing another barrage that shredded bark and splintered ice. Hale ducked low, sprinting toward a rocky outcrop that offered partial cover. His muscles burned, his lungs clawing for air, but discipline kept him steady. He reached the ridge's edge and paused, scanning the valley below. A faint glint in the distance, metal, movement, numbers, told him a larger Vhar'kell force was approaching. Time was collapsing around him. He turned back toward the remaining officers, 3 still standing, and began planting small charges along the ridge path. This was no longer a hunt. It was survival measured in seconds. When the next group arrived, they would find only the aftermath. Hale's breath came slow, and even as he armed the final charge and whispered to himself, "One ridge, one man. Let's make it count." Then he raised his rifle again, waiting for them to step closer. The charges Hale planted sat half-buried beneath veils of powdery snow, their faint blinking lights obscured by the shifting shadows of the ridge. He checked each trigger line with practiced speed, keeping one ear tuned to the alien officers advancing with renewed urgency. Their movements had grown stiff, weighed down by the cold gnawing at their armor, yet their determination had hardened. They no longer searched for a ghost. They hunted a threat that had wounded their pride. Hale understood that kind of stubbornness. Pride could keep a soldier standing long after sense told him to retreat. He settled behind a jagged outcrop that angled downward toward the ravine. The wind carried a low hum, alien voices trading clipped commands. The officers pushed forward in a staggered formation, scanning for traps, but unaware they were already walking through one. Hale felt his heartbeat steady as he rested the rifle on its bipod and aligned the scope. Snowflakes drifted across his vision, refracting the sunlight into a soft, deceptive glow. It was almost peaceful. It reminded him of winters on his childhood world, before the Vhar'kell turned it into ash. That memory, instead of wounding him, sharpened his resolve. He wanted these officers to understand the cost of their arrogance. The first alien stepped into the narrow corridor between 2 boulders, its boots cracking thin layers of frost. Hale pressed the detonator. The explosion erupted upward with a muffled roar, flinging ice and soil in a violent curtain. The blast didn't kill the officer outright, but it sent it stumbling backward, armor fractured in a spiderweb of fissures. The remaining 2 officers reacted instantly, diving for cover and firing bursts of plasma that carved molten scars into the snow. Hale stayed low, letting the outcrop soak the heat until it hissed and steamed. He pivoted the rifle to track the officer attempting to regroup. The alien leaned heavily against a tree trunk, its helmet fractured along one entire side. Through the crack, he glimpsed the faint shimmer of its inner membranes pulsing with stress. He took a measured breath and fired. The helmet shattered in a crystalline bloom, scattering fragments that flashed like broken stained glass. The alien crumpled without a sound. Two remained now, and both had seen enough to realize that retreat offered better odds than stubborn advance. A harsh pulse echoed from the surviving commander, a guttural frequency vibrating through the air. The alien stepped forward, planting its weapon firmly before emitting a booming broadcast that rattled Hale's teeth. It carried not just threat, but intent, a declaration of dominance, a promise of retribution. Hale lifted his head slightly, letting the vibration wash over him. The challenge didn't intimidate him. If anything, it clarified the battlefield. The officer believed intimidation could undo the damage already done. He keyed his own transmitter, letting his voice travel down to them with composed resolve. Your helmets break because you never learned to bend. His words are not bravado, but a quiet truth born of years spent surviving what should have broken him. The commander stiffened at the unexpected reply, its posture tightening with furious disbelief. Hale took advantage of that single frozen moment. He sighted the rifle on the commander's fractured visor. The alien raised its weapon, but too late. Hale squeezed the trigger. The round punched through the weakened crystal with a resonant crack, and the commander toppled backward, its body carving a long furrow in the snow. The final surviving officer hesitated, half-turned toward the distant reinforcements, now making their way up the valley. Then it slipped on the ice, tumbling toward the ravine's edge. Hale didn't fire. The mountain finished what he had started. Silence reclaimed the ridge in slow, trembling breaths. Hale rose, joints stiff from hours of cold, and surveyed the battlefield strewn with shattered helmets and crystalline fragments glittering like frozen starlight. He listened. No immediate movement, no surviving threats. But faint vibrations in the distance told him more Vhar'kell were nearing. His time here was over. He gathered his gear swiftly, erasing tracks where he could and planting misleading prints where he couldn't. The ridge had been held long enough for the relay to finish its activation. Reinforcements would arrive soon, but Hale would be gone by then, a drifting shadow vanishing into the white expanse. As he slipped into the sheltering forest, he allowed himself one final glance at the ridge. Still standing, he whispered, and then he disappeared into the snow.